over 100 people. Murdered, stabbed in the streets, tortured for fun, for 20 years. The killer? A prince, Imperial family, nephew of the Emperor of China. His name was Liu Pengli. And this is the most disturbing part. He didn't kill for money. He didn't kill for power. He killed because he was bored. This happened over 2,000 years ago, but it's documented, verified. In official Chinese historical records, over 100 victims, confirmed. Some historians say the real number could be 300, maybe more. And here's what makes this case absolutely insane. He got caught, confessed, and his punishment? Not execution. Exile. Comfortable exile. He got to live. This is the story of history's first documented serial killer. A man who had everything and used it all to hunt humans for sport. Let me show you how it started. 2nd century BC. Ancient China. A city called Jidong. It's midnight. The streets are dark, empty. A man is walking home. Maybe a merchant. Maybe a craftsman. Doesn't matter. He's about to die. He hears footsteps behind him, running. He turns around. 6 men, hooded, armed with swords. They surround him. He tries to run. Can't. One of them grabs him, covers his mouth, and then the leader steps forward. Young guy, well-dressed, expensive clothes. The victim sees his face, recognizes him. No, it can't be. The prince? Here, the prince smiles and stabs him. Not once, multiple times. Watches him bleed out. Watches the life drain from his eyes. And feels nothing. No guilt, no remorse. Just satisfaction. The men take the victim's valuables. A few coins, make it look like a robbery. Then they disappear into the night. Back to the palace. Back to their beds. By morning, the body is found. The family weeps. The city guard investigates. Concludes it was bandits. Case closed. Nobody suspects the prince. Because princes don't murder random people, right? Wrong. This was just the beginning. The first of over 100 kills. And Liu Pengli? He was just getting started. So who is this guy? Why does a prince become a serial killer? Liu Pengli was born into the highest level of privilege imaginable. His uncle? The emperor. His father? A king. When his father died, Liu Pengli inherited the throne, became king of Jidong, a vassal kingdom within the Han Empire. Think of it like this. The emperor controls the whole empire, but certain regions are given to royal family members to rule. They have their own courts, their own soldiers, their own laws. They answer to the emperor, but in their territories, they're basically untouchable. Liu Pengli knew this. He understood his power, and he was about to abuse it in the worst way possible. At first, everything seemed normal. He did his royal duties, ceremonies, official business. But inside, something was wrong. He was bored, dangerously bored. He had everything a person could want. Wealth, women, entertainment, but none of it satisfied him. He craved something more, something extreme. And then one night, he discovered what that was. Murder. That first kill, it was addictive. The rush, the power, the fact that he could take a human life and face zero consequences. He was hooked. And so began what historians call the night hunts. Liu Pengli hunting humans like animals. For sport, for fun, for 20 years. Here's how the murders worked. Regular schedule. Sometimes once a month, sometimes multiple times a week. Always at night. Liu Pengli would gather 6 to 10 servants, young men from noble families who served in his palace. Some participated willingly. Others were too terrified to refuse. Because if a prince orders you to join him in murder, saying no might get you killed. They'd leave the palace in disguise. Dark clothes, hoods, armed with swords. They'd prowl the streets looking for targets. Anyone alone, anyone vulnerable. A woman fetching water, a farmer heading home late, a baker starting work early. Anyone. When they found someone, they'd surround them, kill them. Sometimes quick, sometimes slow. Liu Pengli would experiment. torture. See how much pain a person could endure, how long they'd survive. He treated human beings like laboratory animals. Then they'd rob the victims, not because Liu Pengli needed money, he was incredibly wealthy, but because robbery made it look like bandit attacks. Disguised the truth. The victims were completely random. No pattern, no connection. That's what made it so terrifying. Anyone could be next. A teenager in the wrong place. An elderly person. A parent. Anyone. The body count climbed. 5, 10, 20, 50, 100. And nobody knew who was doing it. The city of Jidong lived in fear. Parents kept children inside after dark. Merchants closed early. Families locked their doors, prayed they wouldn't be next. And Liu Pengli, he kept hunting. Year after year, getting bolder, more reckless, more violent, because he believed he was untouchable. And for 20 years, he was right. Now imagine you're one of those servants. You're 18 years old, from a noble family. You were sent to serve in the prince's palace. It's an honor, a privilege. You're supposed to help with ceremonies, paperwork, normal court stuff. Then one night, the prince calls you to his chambers. He looks at you with this strange excitement in his eyes, tells you to dress in dark clothes, arm yourself, follow him. Don't ask questions. You're confused, scared, but you obey because he's the prince. You follow him out of the palace, through the city, and then you witness it. Your first murder. You watch the prince kill someone, a random stranger, for no reason. And you realize, this is your life now. You're part of this. Un accomplice. If you tell anyone, the prince will kill you. If you refuse to participate, the prince will kill you. You're trapped. Some servants probably hated it, lived with crushing guilt, had nightmares, but kept going because they had no choice. Others, maybe they started to enjoy it. Put someone in a violent situation long enough. Give them power over life and death. Some people adapt, some break, and some discover darkness inside themselves they never knew existed. This is what absolute power does. It doesn't just corrupt the person who has it, it corrupts everyone around them, forces them to become complicit, turns good people into killers, because refusing means death. Over 20 years, dozens of servants participated. Dozens of young men who became accomplices to mass murder. Not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. But here's where Liu Pengli made his first mistakes. As the years went on, he got sloppy, more reckless, more frequent hunts, more violence. Some victims survived long enough to describe their attackers. Well-dressed young men, quality weapons, not common bandits. That's strange. Why would wealthy people be robbing peasants? Witnesses started seeing patterns, attacks near the palace. Groups of armed men leaving the palace at night, returning with bloodstains. And then, the breakthrough. One of Liu Pengli's servants talked. We don't know who, we don't know why. Maybe guilt, maybe conscience, maybe they got caught in another crime and traded information. But somehow, word spread, whispers, rumors. The prince is involved. At first, nobody believed it. Too outrageous, too impossible. But the rumors persisted. More witnesses came forward, more evidence, more testimony. The rumors reached the capital, reached the Imperial court, reached the emperor himself, and Emperor Jing had a choice. Ignore it, cover it up, or investigate. Investigate his own nephew, a member of the royal family. He chose to investigate. Imperial officials were sent to Jidong. They interviewed witnesses, examined evidence, interrogated servants. What they found was horrifying. The accusations were true, all of them. Liu Pengli had been murdering people for over 20 years. The official count? Over 100 victims. But that was just what they could confirm. The real number? Probably much higher. This was unprecedented. Nothing like this had ever been documented. A serial killer, a prince, killing for pleasure, for decades. The investigators brought their findings to the emperor, and now Emperor Jing had to decide. What do you do with a prince who's murdered over 100 people? According to Han Dynasty law, Liu Pengli should be executed. Murder is a capital crime. Over 100 murders? Death penalty, no question. But there's a problem. Liu Pengli is royal family. Executing him would be a massive scandal. Embarrass the Imperial family, make them look weak, make them look like they can't control their own relatives. So Emperor Jing makes a decision. He strips Liu Pengli of his title, removes him from the royal family, essentially erases him, and then exile. Liu Pengli is banished to a remote county, Shenyang, far from the capital, far from civilization. That's it. That's his punishment for murdering over 100 people. Liu Pengli gets exile. Not execution, not even prison, just exile to a distant region. Why such a light sentence? Because he's royal family, because the emperor wants to avoid scandal, because executing a prince would set a dangerous precedent. So Liu Pengli is exiled. And here's the truly sickening part. We don't even know if he stopped killing. Historical records stop mentioning him. He disappears. Did he die in exile? Did he live peacefully? Or did he continue murdering in his new location? We'll never know. What we do know, over 100 families got no justice. Over 100 people were murdered, their families traumatized, their communities terrorized for decades. And the killer? He got to live. He walked away. Because he was born into the right family. That's ancient justice. Your punishment depends on your status. If you're royal, the rules don't apply. So why? Why did Liu Pengli do this? He had everything. Wealth, status, power, women, anything he wanted. Why murder random strangers? Modern psychologists would probably diagnose him as a psychopath. Someone who lacks empathy, who sees other humans as objects, not people, who craves stimulation and takes it through violence. But here's the thing. Psychopathy alone doesn't create a serial killer. Plenty of psychopaths never murder anyone. They become CEOs, surgeons, politicians. They find socially acceptable outlets. What makes Liu Pengli different? Power. Absolute, unchecked power. He had the authority to do whatever he wanted, and he knew he could get away with it. Psychopathy plus power equals catastrophe. There's a famous saying, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Liu Pengli is the perfect example. He was born into a system that told him he was superior, that commoners' lives didn't matter, that the rules didn't apply to him, and he believed it. So completely that he felt entitled to kill for entertainment. The victims? He didn't see them as people. They were toys, distractions, objects to satisfy his boredom. That's what absolute power does. It dehumanizes everyone beneath you. And here's the scary part. Liu Pengli wasn't unique. Throughout history, we see this pattern over and over. Rulers who kill for pleasure, emperors who torture for fun, nobles who hunt humans like game. Liu Pengli is just one example, one of the earliest documented, but definitely not the last. Let's talk about the victims, because we often focus on the killer and forget the people who suffered. Over 100 people died. But who were they? We don't have names. The historical records don't list them. They were commoners, peasants, farmers, merchants, the kinds of people who didn't get written about. So they died, and their names died with them, erased from history. Just numbers in a record. More than 100, but each one was a person. Think about that. Over 100 people with families, with children, with hopes and dreams. People who woke up not knowing it would be their last day. The terror they felt in their final moments. Seeing armed men approaching, realizing they couldn't escape. The pain, the fear, the senselessness, and then their families. Waking up the next day, realizing their father, mother, child didn't come home. Finding the body, or maybe never finding it. Living with that uncertainty, that grief, that rage. Some families probably fell into poverty after losing a breadwinner. Some children grew up without parents. Some parents buried their children. All because one privileged psychopath was bored. And those families probably never learned the truth. The details were kept quiet, covered up to protect the Imperial family's reputation. So they died, never knowing who killed their loved ones, or why. That's the true horror. Not just the murders, but the complete lack of justice, the erasure, the silence. Liu Pengli got to live, got to walk away, while his victims rotted in unmarked graves, forgotten, nameless, just numbers. You might be thinking, this happened 2,000 years ago, ancient history. What does it matter now? Everything. Because the pattern hasn't changed. Power still protects people from consequences. Wealth still buys freedom. Status still shields criminals. Think about modern cases. How many wealthy people commit crimes and face minimal consequences? How many politicians use connections to avoid prosecution? How many executives harm thousands through negligence and walk away with golden parachutes? Different names, different methods, same dynamic. The powerful escape accountability. The vulnerable suffer. Liu Pengli murdered over 100 people. His punishment? Exile. Today, we'd like to think he'd face execution. Life in prison. Real justice. But would he? If he was a prince in a modern country, with unlimited wealth and connections, are we sure he'd face appropriate consequences? Or would his lawyers find technicalities? Would his family use influence? Would the government worry about scandal? I'm not saying modern justice is as broken as ancient China. It's better, improved. But the temptation is the same. The pressure to protect power structures, to avoid scandals, to prioritize stability over justice. That temptation exists in every system, and we need to actively resist it. Constantly, vigilantly, because without pressure, without vigilance, systems default to protecting power. That's what happened in ancient China. That's what happens now, unless we fight it. Liu Pengli got away with murder for over 20 years. Not because investigation was impossible, but because nobody tried, nobody dared. Everyone assumed the prince was untouchable. How many modern criminals are getting away with harm because we assume they're untouchable? How many victims are suffering because systems protect perpetrators? Let's talk about something impressive. How ancient Chinese investigators actually solved this case. Because remember, this is 2nd century BC. No forensics, no DNA, no fingerprints, no cameras. How do you catch a serial killer in that world? How do you prove a prince is guilty when he has all the power? Patient, methodical investigation. And honestly, what these investigators did was brilliant. First, pattern recognition. They mapped out where the killings happened, when, who the victims were. Patterns emerged. Murders clustered near the palace. Always at night. Victims were random, but geography wasn't. That's suspicious. Second, witness testimony. Some victims survived long enough to describe attackers. Well-dressed, quality weapons. Other witnesses saw groups leaving the palace at night. These observations, collected over time, built a case. Third, informant testimony. Someone inside Liu Pengli's operation talked, gave details only an insider would know. Specific murders, specific victims, dates, methods. That testimony was devastating, impossible to refute. Fourth, interrogation. Once they had enough evidence, they interrogated servants systematically. Started with lower-ranking ones, got confessions, used those to pressure higher-ranking servants. Built a chain of testimony, each person confirming what the previous one said. The whole investigation probably took years because they knew what they were dealing with. Accusing a prince of serial murder. That's not something you do lightly. You need absolute proof. One mistake, and the case collapses. Worse, the investigators themselves might be executed for false accusations. So they were careful, patient, methodical, and eventually, they had a case so strong, even the emperor couldn't ignore it. That's impressive investigative work, especially for ancient times. It shows that catching criminals isn't about technology. It's about pattern recognition, witness testimony, logical reasoning. These ancient investigators used the same principles modern detectives use, and they succeeded. They caught a serial killer, proved his guilt, in 2nd century BC, without any modern tools. Those investigators deserve recognition. They were skilled, dedicated, brave, because investigating a prince, that took serious courage. Let's compare Liu Pengli to modern serial killers. The similarities are striking. Liu Pengli fits the profile of what criminologists call a thrill killer, someone who murders for psychological satisfaction. The rush, the sense of power, no material motive, just violence for its own sake. His hunting pattern is classic predator behavior. He targeted vulnerable victims, people who were alone, at night, in isolated areas. Modern serial killers do the same thing. The escalation is textbook. Liu Pengli probably started with one kill, then another. Then it became regular, more frequent, more violent. Serial killers develop a tolerance. The thrill diminishes, so they need to kill more often, or more brutally. But here's the big difference. Modern serial killers usually operate in secret. They hide their crimes. They fear getting caught. Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, BTK. They all went to great lengths to avoid detection. Liu Pengli didn't fear consequences. Not really. Yes, he disguised himself, but he wasn't that careful. He involved dozens of accomplices. He operated in the same areas repeatedly because he believed his status protected him, and for over 20 years it did. That's what makes him unique. He's not just a serial killer. He's a serial killer with institutional protection. A killer operating within a system designed to shield him. The closest modern equivalent would be certain military dictators who murdered civilians, or drug lords like Pablo Escobar. People who had enough power that law enforcement couldn't touch them. But even those cases are different, because those killers had political or economic motives. Liu Pengli? Pure pleasure, pure violence, no rational goal, just entertainment. Another difference. Modern serial killers often have traumatic childhoods, abuse, neglect, psychological damage. We don't know much about Liu Pengli's childhood, but he was raised in luxury, privilege, everything he could want, which suggests his violence came from somewhere else. Maybe neurological. Maybe he was born with certain brain differences. Or maybe the privilege itself was the problem, being raised to believe you're superior to everyone else. That can create monsters too. When the investigation report reached Emperor Jing, he faced a nightmare scenario. This wasn't just a criminal case. This was a threat to the entire Imperial system. His nephew, his own blood, had murdered over 100 people. The evidence was undeniable. Witness after witness, servant testimony, physical evidence. Liu Pengli was guilty, but executing him? That opened a Pandora's box. First, the family issue. The royal family is supposed to be sacred, divine, chosen by heaven to rule. If a member can be executed for crimes, what does that say about their divine status? It suggests they're just humans, fallible, capable of evil. That undermines imperial legitimacy. Second, the precedent issue. If Emperor Jing executes Liu Pengli, he's establishing that emperors can execute relatives, today for murder, tomorrow for treason, or political disagreement, or simply being inconvenient. Other royal family members would be terrified. Some might rebel. Third, public perception. If the emperor admits a prince was murdering civilians for decades and nobody stopped him, what does that say about imperial control? Citizens might question whether the empire can protect them. This could spark instability. So Emperor Jing chose compromise. Strip Liu Pengli of his title, remove him from the royal family, banish him. It shows action was taken, but avoids execution, avoids the dangerous precedent. Is it justice? No, absolutely not. Liu Pengli deserved execution, death penalty, no question. But politics isn't about justice. It's about power, stability, control. Emperor Jing sacrificed the victims' families to protect the imperial system. That's the cold reality of autocratic rule. And this is the other tragedy. Not just the murders, but the systematic failure of justice that followed. The decision to prioritize political stability over human lives. To protect the powerful instead of the vulnerable. That wasn't committed by one sick individual. That was committed by the entire system. We don't know much about Liu Pengli's life in exile. Historical records stop mentioning him. But let's think about what that probably looked like. Shenyang County, remote, mountainous, far from civilization. But Liu Pengli wasn't thrown into a prison cell. He wasn't working labor camps. He was a former prince. Even stripped of his title, he still had connections. residual status. He probably lived in a decent house. Not luxury, but comfortable. He probably had servants, guards to ensure he didn't leave, but also to protect him. Because exile isn't always safe. There were probably locals who knew what he did, who wanted revenge. Did Liu Pengli continue killing in exile? We don't know. It's possible. If he's truly a psychopath, truly addicted to violence, then exile wouldn't cure him. He might find new victims, villagers, travelers, people who wouldn't be missed. Or maybe the exile broke him, took away his sense of invincibility. Without palace protection, without his title, without his power, maybe he finally felt vulnerable. Maybe that fear stopped him, or maybe he lived quietly, bored, frustrated, angry, thinking about his glory days, when he could kill anyone with no consequences. Now he's nobody, powerless, irrelevant, or a narcissist. For someone who craved power and control, that might be its own torture. Worse than death, to be forgotten, erased, to go from prince to nothing. Did he ever feel remorse? Did he ever think about his victims? Probably not. Psychopaths don't develop empathy. Liu Pengli probably spent exile feeling sorry for himself, bitter about losing his status, resentful. The victims? In his mind, they probably never mattered. We're never really people, just objects, toys that got him in trouble. That's the reality of monsters. They don't reform, they don't repent, they just stop when forced to stop. So what does Liu Pengli's story teach us? First, power needs accountability. Always. When someone has power without oversight, bad things happen. Liu Pengli had power without accountability, and he used it to kill over 100 people. The principle applies everywhere. Bosses who abuse employees, police who use excessive force, politicians who exploit citizens. When power is unchecked, it corrupts. Second, privilege blinds people to others' humanity. Liu Pengli was raised in a system that told him he was superior, that commoners were beneath him, that their lives didn't matter. So he believed it and acted on it. This is what systemic inequality does. It creates hierarchies where some lives are valued and others aren't. Third, silence enables violence. Liu Pengli's crimes continued for decades, partly because people were too scared to speak up. Witnesses stayed quiet. Servants participated out of fear. Victims' families suffered in silence. That silence allowed the violence to continue. Fourth, justice is often determined by status. Liu Pengli murdered over 100 people. His punishment? Exile. Compare that to a commoner who stole food. They'd be executed. That's the reality throughout most of history. The rules depend on who you are. And while modern societies have improved, this problem still exists. Fifth, historical crimes matter. Liu Pengli isn't unique. His type exists in every era. Wealthy, powerful, entitled, violent, and usually protected. By telling his story, we remind ourselves what happens when we let power go unchecked. Liu Pengli's story doesn't end with his exile, because the pattern continues today. Different perpetrators, different victims, but the same dynamic. People in power still commit violence, still face minimal consequences, still rely on status to shield them. The names change, the methods change, but the pattern remains. So when you hear about Liu Pengli, don't just think of him as historical curiosity. Think of him as a warning about what happens when power is unchecked, when privilege becomes immunity, when violence is excused, when victims are forgotten. Over 100 people died because one man was bored, because one man had power, because one man believed he could do whatever he wanted. And for 20 years, he was right. That's the story of Liu Pengli, the Chinese prince who killed for fun, the murderer who walked away, the monster who was protected by the very system meant to stop monsters. And somewhere in ancient China, his victims are still waiting for someone to remember their names. But here's what we can do. We can learn. We can remember. We can refuse to let this pattern repeat. We can demand accountability for the powerful. We can speak up even when it's dangerous. We can fight for justice even when systems resist, because that's what those ancient investigators showed us. That courage and persistence can challenge power, can expose crimes, can demand accountability. They didn't win completely. Liu Pengli should have been executed. But they won partially. They stopped the murders. They exposed the truth. They proved a prince could be investigated, could be caught, could be punished. That's not perfect justice, but it's something. It's progress. It's hope. And that's what we should take from this story. Keep pushing. Keep demanding. Keep fighting for justice. Even when it seems impossible. Even when power seems untouchable. Because sometimes, with enough effort, enough courage, enough persistence, you can break through. You can hold the powerful accountable. You can stop monsters. Liu Pengli killed over 100 people. But the investigators who stopped him? Those are the heroes. The people who risked everything to expose the truth. Who refused to accept that anyone was above justice. That's the legacy that matters. That's the story we need to remember. And that's the fight that continues today.